terrible allergic reaction to, like, life. The glare in my glasses is driving me wild. But there's a book coming out Tuesday that I want to talk about. What a shock. I'm a little more low-key than I would like to be. My roommate had her best friend over, and I am an introvert. I do hit a limit and I need quiet, a lot of quiet. And tomorrow will probably be very similar. This will be the only real talking I do. I'm just going to let myself be quiet, because there were so many times in my life where I said, you can't do that. You can't be quiet. People are relying on you. They don't like it. Except for my kid. My kid doesn't deserve that. But everybody else. And, bless my kid for, recognizing that I needed it at, a very young age and, rolling with it. Because kids are great like that. But my kid especially is really cool about just being like, this is who you are. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about two books that I read this week, and then throw in a third because I didn't expect to read it in time, but I did, because I pushed this back because there was someone in my house. And so the first book is Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour, which I always feel like I'm saying liqueur. I feel like a doof. I really do. So Nina LaCour. Oh my God. I'm really out of it. Sorry. It's almost 4 a.m. I think. This is her adult debut. And so far, she's been a YA author and written some really good books, and one of them is just, I don't know if it just hit me at the right time or if it is just absolutely brilliant. And it was the one that I read for Rainbow, which usually I know the name of it off the top of my head, but here we are, almost 4 a.m. I'm very tired. I forgot to eat lunch and dinner, unless you count a snack as lunch, which let's do that and pretend that I didn't accidentally skip 2 meals. Blame the allergies. And yeah, so adult debut. A lot of times when YA authors move into adult books, it tends to be, they tend to just get a little bit more explicit. And that's not to say that that is a bad thing. It just means that the characters are a little bit older and they don't have those sort of weird, almost puritanical restrictions that YA either really has or doesn't. Because YA is very strange, because it sort of started out as teen books about teens, which are, real and gritty, or Sweet Valley High. And I feel like that still exists. That dichotomy of you have two choices. I can play this with my Barbie dolls, or trauma. And yeah, so in this book, that's not really how, that goes. Although, there's sex in this book. It's about two women and how they go from being about, I think it's 13 until 29-ish, I think. Sorry, I really should have made this video sooner. And the descriptions that I've seen about it are about like the parallels of their lives or something. And that's, if you read that, no. No, it's not the right wording. So either I read it wrong or it's not quite right. It's more about how these two people live their lives up into the moment that they like meet and then are like in each other's orbit and then come together. So the thing about it, so it's a really good book. It's really good. I don't think that it has that, like, you know, the growing pain of switching from like a younger audience to an older audience. The place where I would say that I felt like it was the weakest was the choice to use a non-linear timeline. It is not specified in the arc when you're reading, and it does not necessarily, like, it doesn't have like headers with like dates or anything like that. So you're really jumping around quite a bit. So it's not like, you know, both of them are 13, both of them are like 15, both of them are like whatever. You really get a lot of jumping around. It's like one of them is 13, one of them is 13, one of them is 15, one of them is still 13. And I'm like, okay, hold on. Let me just make sure I know where I am. And that happens a bunch. And it's not just like, you know, they're on two different paths. I feel like, you know, sometimes you're just ahead and then they think back, and it doesn't have like a really strong framework. However, that sort of goes along with one of the characters who has this sort of like wispy way of going through life, where she doesn't really like settle on like anything. She's sort of just floating from one thing to the next, and life kind of happens to her instead of her making any real choices. And I think that that's going to be like the other thing that people are going to either, like, that's going to be the thing where people are going to be like, I just couldn't get into her. Totally understandable. There were times where I was just like, oh my God, just like make a decision. But also, how do you have so much like main character energy? And it's not like narcissism, like the way that people throw around the word narcissism like nowadays, where they're like, you have narcissistic personality disorder. No, just like that general, like, I can't imagine the world not revolving around me because, well, if you know, you know. And if you don't know, then maybe this book will help you understand a little better when you get towards the end and you understand, things start to fall a little bit into place. But believe me, it comes together. And but she, you know, there is like a, oh my gosh, please just like stop letting things happen to you. The other character, I think, is a little bit more, you know, she's grounded, but holy moly, does her storyline come with a lot of content notices and trigger warnings. So, was not expecting that, because all the description in the book I saw were like, two women whose lives run parallel, and I'm like, okay, cool. And then I open up the book and there is like, death of a minor and sexual coercion, and there's a lot going on in this book that I was not expecting, and it was a lot to take in from a book that, it's not like I was expecting it to be like fuzzy and warm, but I did not expect it to go so dark so quick. It does not stay like that, but yeah. So, in case you were wondering, is this the book for me if I'm looking for a little light reading? The answer is no. So yeah, I do think that the non-linear thing was not my favorite. I do think that it would have worked a little bit better if there was just a little bit of a header. Character name, age, whatever. But I don't know if that was really me. But I don't necessarily think so. Because the second book that I read is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which drops in July. And it's Gabrielle Zevin, who also started out in YA and then moved to adult books a couple of years ago, with the amazing, oh my God, I'm doing it again, where I'm like completely blanking on the name of a book that I've really enjoyed. We Are Okay is the Nina LaCour, and the Gabrielle Zevin is The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, which I adored. It's like a crabby guy has a bookstore, and if I remember correctly, because this was quite a few years ago, and I think before I got sick, he finds someone leaves a baby at the bookstore, I think is what happens. And that book gave me so many feels, just so many feels. And I was expecting maybe something more like that. Yes. Not necessarily, like not a book that was like just straight up like heartwarming, but a book that's going to play with my emotions. And I'm right. It also does not work in perfect linear time, but I think it's handled a little bit better because it doesn't play around with it as much. And when it does, it feels a lot clearer because the characters are so distinct. Yeah, I think one of the problems is when you have a character who's kind of wispy and sort of almost, she's not a ghost in her own life, but she is kind of like, if she were a character in a movie, she'd be like a flower floating down a river. If she happens to bump into a log, I don't remember the name of the log, and I had such a difficult time remembering the characters on her side of the story. Like, oh, I know that that's like somebody who's related to the family that lived across the street from her, but anything about her? Like, what is it like to be? Anyway, I'm still just going down that hole. Anyway, so Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is about two people who meet when they're young, and how they sort of go on to meet later. They meet again later when they're in college. And from there, they create a video game, which becomes really successful, and they create a video game company, which becomes incredibly successful. But it's not about like the video game company, it's about them and sort of their journeys and their friendship. And there's a lot of like, what is the nature of love, and what makes us choose relationships and what makes us not choose relationships. And it's not even like, it doesn't even feel universal. And that's like its strength, is that you get so wrapped up in them and their friends and their family and their stories that a little bopping around in time is not a big deal, because you are so grounded in who they are, and you recognize that like it doesn't matter where you are in their timeline, you are so with them, right? Like you give a shit about who they are, and the people around them are a little bit more vivid because they are more vivid. So like the people that matter to them matter. So the thing about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is that every time I checked how far in I was on the book, I was shocked. And that sounds really weird, but because I have all these deadlines on books, I'm always checking where I am. But with this book, I was checking it because I had so many feelings about everything that was going on that I would just be overwhelmed with feelings. And I'd be like, how close are we to the end? Because we, you know, the royal we, whatever. How close am I to the end? I am feeling a lot here. And then it would be like 30%. And I'm like, I have lived a lifetime with these people. If not a lifetime, then a story. And then I would check again and it would be like 45 or like 46 or whatever. And then I would check it again and it would be like 60. And I'm like, how are you doing this? How are you overwhelming me with like the depth of this and still being in the same story? Like, oh, by the end, I almost felt like there was too much, which doesn't make any sense. Like, I've read epics of generations of people that didn't feel like I was in their lives longer than these two people, if that makes sense. And you're not dealing with the minutia of their lives at all. There's just a weight to this book where you literally feel like you're living this time out with them. Like the time is like legitimately passing, and you go from the time that they're kids to the time that they're, I think it's like it ends when they're like 35-ish or something. And you just feel that time. You really do. She is just such an extraordinary writer, and I hope that this book blows up. I hope that it does. My fear is that it's going to skip the nerds because it's about video games a little, but not significantly. And it's not science fiction or even like near whatever. It's like there's nothing in it that doesn't feel like doable. I mean, maybe the games sound like they might be a little bit. Maybe the games are like a little bit ahead of their time, but I'm not sure that they even are. I think that, you know, just the way that you think of them in your head, you're like, ooh, they're so amazing. But probably on the screen, they're just full of pixels. And the literary people will be like, oh, it's about video games? No, it's not about video games. It's about two nerds who create a company together. It's about two people who create a company together and their friendship. Yeah. I will say though, it's right. There was a part in it that shocked me because I did not expect there to be what happens in there, which is there is a shooting in it. And I'm just going to tell you that straight up because of the week that we have had in this country. And I am feeling kind of lucky that I read it and finished it when I got it finished. I also read The Perfect Crimes of Marian Hayes, which is a romance by Cat Sebastian. It is a very bisexual disaster romance about two people who are just absolute nonsense. The whole thing is that it's a second book, and so you know how romance goes. It's like, okay, well, you have the first couple in the first book, and then in the second book, you know, maybe they're a little overlappy or a bit, you know, hello, the first couple has checked in. Let us see where they are now. Maybe they have a baby, you know, kind of a thing, you know, like that's very common in romance. No, the plots are directly tied to each other. And in fact, if I'm reading Goodreads correctly, the plots are literally happening at the same time, which I did not get from the book. I thought that they heavily overlapped, but only in like the beginning-ish. And apparently I'm wrong. And the reason that I felt that way is because I didn't feel like I was getting half a book. There was one scene in which I was surprised that we were getting like a tell not show. So when I saw the thing on Goodreads that was like, the plots go to the same place, like timeline wise, I'm like, oh, that would explain the telling not showing if that scene is from the other perspective of the person who's in the first book. Okay. But I did not feel that I had to read the first book to get the second book. Some people on Goodreads did. I think it's called The Queer Principles of Kit Webb. It is just, it's light in that I do wonder if some of the heavy lifting of the story is done in the first book. Most of it is just the two of them sort of traveling their way and hiding and then coming back. So it is mostly just very character based, and the characters are really wonderful. But that lightness did make it a little bit harder for me to, like, I guess there's just like a little something about it. Like I just, like there is that very like light feel to the read. There were like a couple chapters that sort of felt like they ended a little like abruptly. I never really felt like I got into their heads. Like it just seemed like they were two people who met a really good time in their lives to like get together, which isn't really what I'm looking for from a romance. It was like a nice way to pass like a day. But what I really enjoyed, and I don't usually enjoy sex scenes, but I enjoyed the sex scenes in this one because they are very much part of the relationship process, like how these two people become entangled with one another, like romantically, emotionally. The sex is a huge part of that. And I like, that's a huge thing for me. Like, I enjoy when sex is more than just a thing that happens in books because people are hot and they want to have it, because that's not how I feel about sex at all. Here's Tiny again, deciding that because I'm talking, she has to be around me. But yeah, so would I recommend reading the book by it? Tiny, that's rude. Would I recommend reading the book by itself? You can. You absolutely can. I don't know that I would like recommend doing it when the other book is like right there. Tiny, they can't see what you're doing, but it's really ridiculous. So, no, just get both. My eyes are watering from allergies, and I feel like, hey, what if I just like put the reflection on there so you don't have to look at it? Yeah, so those were the 3 books that I read that I'm talking about, because I'm already at a half hour, which means I can edit this under a half hour and be very proud of myself. Next time, I will be talking about some other things, which include a horror comic and I think there's another romance coming up, and a book that's either a thriller or a horror. I don't know. I think it's just a thriller, which I have not done in a while. Like a long while. Especially like this kind of thriller.